The Tom Woods Show, episode 634.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hey gang, I got an easy way for you to earn 50 smackers. You listening? Ebates has changed its reward policy. You refer 2 friends and you get $50. Ebates rewards you for shopping at a wide array of online retailers with cash rebates. And you get 50 smackers if you refer just 2 friends. Surely you have 2 friends, then you can have 50 smackers in your pocket. Check it out at tomwoods.com/ebates. Hi everybody, Tom Woods here. We're talking to Gene Epstein today. We're talking about the Economic Freedom of the World Index and what it has to teach us. Gene is not only a frequent guest here on the show, but of course he is the economics and book review editor at Barron's, the nation's premier financial publication. You can check it out at barrons.com. Gene, welcome back to the show.
An honor to be back on my favorite podcast, Tom.
Oh, that's very good of you to say. You are freshly returned from Romania. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. I want to talk about your column on the economic freedom of the world. These economic freedom of the world indexes always make for interesting discussions. I think your column is probably behind a paywall at Barron's. Am I right?
I'm not sure. I think you can get it on just by Googling. After a week or so, things get freed up pretty well.
All right.
But indeed, they're in it for the money, and so they don't make it easy for people to get through to me. So that's true.
Well, we'll try and suck all the meat out of it here in the discussion. All right.
Let's do that. Yeah.
All right. So give people an overview. What's the basic lesson that a person who does not go into this matter of economic freedom of the world, looking at this index, what would that person take away from this? A dispassionate person, what conclusion would they draw?
Well, the basic finding is that first, that it's possible to construct a Milton Friedmanite, and I emphasize that because Milton Friedman consulted on the construction of this index when it was put together in the 1980s. It's possible to construct an index of economic freedom, or as the Fraser Institute, which is the source on this, puts it, it is indeed an index of the degree of entrepreneurial capitalism within a country. It's possible to construct an index on a scale of 1 to 10, if you could believe it. And once you do that, you find that the numbers that you construct over time and across countries do tend to explain rates of economic growth, slowdowns in economic growth, and comparisons between countries, levels of income, poverty, wealth, and so on. So if you have a high economic freedom index, you're more than likely to be a rich country. A low economic freedom index, you're more than likely to be a poor country. And in particular, since I'm writing for Barron's, for a U.S. audience, and since the U.S. economy is mainly my beat, what I found, so much to the surprise of a lot of readers, but we can get to that, is that the economic freedom index rose fairly steadily in each decade from 1970 to 2000, but that since 2000 it's fallen fairly steadily, and that the rise of the economic freedom index in that first 30 years from 1970 to 2000 correlates pretty well with reasonably good growth over that period. And since 2000, both under the Bush administration, by the way, and the Obama administration, we've had a marked slowdown in growth, and I believe that that's also explained by the decline in the economic freedom index since 2000. So that's the main lesson.
All right, so let's talk about what have been examples of the decline in economic freedom since 2000. What has happened in the economy and with government that could explain this result?
Yes. Well, first I should emphasize that there's a scale of 1 to 10, but 10 is by no means perfect. Everything is marked on a curve, and so the idea, the finding is that degrees of capitalism, degrees of entrepreneurship can actually be more or less measured by the Economic Freedom Index. So it isn't as though the period from 1970 to 2000 was a wonderful period, but the whole point is that there's been a deterioration since 2000. Well, what can you latch upon? And the interesting thing is that the Economic Freedom Index, because it's so abstract, it deals with actual explicit numbers, so that, for example, the decline in a subcomponent of it called legal system and property rights, which is the most severe and the most important, the preservation of property rights and the preservation of a stable legal system, that has deteriorated since 2000. Well, what do we find? We find a whole lot of stuff happened under Bush. Sarbanes-Oxley happened under Bush. A lot of we find that the rescue of General Motors and the rescue of Chrysler in 2008, 2009, bondholders, the agreement that bondholders come first was completely abrogated, and we find as well, of course, that the rise in regulatory tightness, certainly under Obama as well as under Bush, also occurred, and the housing bubble, the intervention, the massive intervention in the markets by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, underwritten and pushed by HUD, also occurred. Started under Clinton, but really reached full tilt under Bush, and that led to the bust, and then that led to massive intervention and bailouts of corporations. All of that is fairly well understood. The only thing that's been obscured is that people tend to think that the decline in economic freedom only coincided with Obama, when in fact this objective data, and I emphasize that it's objective in the sense that it lives a life of its own. It was the standards were compiled prior to 2000, and the findings just speak for themselves. We see the decline under Bush. We don't have to retrofit the data to our knowledge of the past. This is not hindsight. This is actually just what happened to the U.S. economy. And the reasons for it under Bush, as I mentioned, Sarbanes-Oxley, and of course Dodd-Frank under Obama, all of those factors, I believe, are reasonably evident. And in a way, by the way, Tom, I would say that the puzzle then becomes what was so good under in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. That's a bipartisan story too. But in fact, we find that there actually was progress, even though the best is none too good, even though, again, as I emphasized, a 10 on the Economic Freedom Index still falls far short of your ideal and mine about entrepreneurial capitalism. But the whole point about the rise for the first 30 years and then the fall since 2000, I believe, is stares you in the face and speaks for itself.
Just a side point, I know it's not central to the discussion, but the auto bailouts that you mentioned.
Yes.
Now I understand the reason, the role that played is you're right. The abrogation of this, I don't know, century-long understanding that the bondholders, are taken care of first, but I just want to point out that Hillary Clinton has been pointing to the auto bailouts as one of her many reasons that the Democrats can be trusted because they've done such a wonderful job. We saved the auto industry.
Yes.
Why is she wrong to cite that as a good thing?
Well, as a matter of fact, another guest on your show, David Stockman, has been probably one of the best scholars on this point. Obviously, of course, it was done only because Obama wanted to clinch the state of Michigan in the election. That was his obvious motivation. Secondly, it was sort of absurd on its face that we really needed to save auto jobs. As David Stockman pointed out, All that really happened is that we kept high-priced jobs in Michigan, and we lost a lot of lower-priced and more viable jobs in the southern states where there are a lot of auto companies already. Actually, of course, many of them owned by the Japanese, but what difference does that make? They're employing auto workers. So the joke was that it isn't as though we would even have lost auto jobs, likely lost auto jobs to foreigners. It was really that the high-priced jobs in Michigan had to be saved, and in the South and South Carolina and elsewhere where other auto jobs could have been created, they were sacrificed because that wasn't in Obama's calculus with respect to winning the election. And of course, the idea of bailing out Chrysler, which had already been bailed out once before, is only kicking the can down the road. It obviously does no good to keep telling a lumbering bureaucratic corporation that however much it screws up, you're going to get bailed out. Inevitably, that leads to disaster. General Motors now has a little bit more life in it, but who knows? Most likely, the next time we have a recession, there'll be perhaps yet another bailout, depending on the political calculus of the president in charge. So it was clearly a disaster on any ground and could not, as Stockman pointed out, even be justified by the idea that that the jobs would have gone abroad. Clearly, they would have gone to the southern company, to the American workers who work for Toyota for a decent wage and who produce cars at a profit. That's what would have happened, as Stockman pointed out.
All right, let's get back to the Economic Freedom of the World Index. I've covered this in the past, but can you explain how do the Scandinavian countries fit into all this?
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, the president of Denmark, I guess, was insulted by Bernie Sanders' statement that he's got a socialist country, and he negated that. As the Economic Freedom Index consists of 5 subcomponents, and the only component in which the Scandinavian countries, in particular, of course, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, are lower than the U.S. is with respect to size of government, and they have problems with their welfare state. But obviously, if you're a small country, I mean, none of these, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they have fewer people than New York City has. They're relatively homogeneous, and so the possibilities of sustaining a welfare state without collateral damage are much greater, even though problems have arisen with respect to the welfare state in these 3 countries. But with respect to the 4 other components, these Scandinavian countries are on balance more capitalist than the U.S., and in particular, as I pointed out in my column, the most important subcomponent of the index is property rights and legal and rule of law. And with respect to that, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden are noticeably higher with respect to respect for property rights. And actually, what's interesting about the methodology in this case is that it's based upon surveys of executives in each of these countries run by the World Economic Forum. And the executives are asked to rate the court system, to rate the reliability of property rights on a scale actually of 1 to 7. And the Scandinavian, in these Scandinavian countries, the executives in these countries rate their court system and their property rights systems noticeably higher than American executives have been rating theirs. And so that's the way it's derived. That's why, by the way, it's based on, and as the sources on the Economic Freedom Index emphasize, you can ask people lots of things about which they'll know very little. But when you're talking to executives of corporations, they have firsthand experience about how they deal with the legal thicket of rules in their country. So they are dealing with knowledge. And the fact that the Scandinavian executives rate their own country higher, I think, says a lot. And the fact that in the U.S., executives in the U.S. are rating their country lower and lower, much lower than in 2000, that subcomponent has fallen much greater. That also, I think, says a lot. And so with respect to that most important component, the Scandinavian countries are way ahead. With respect to regulation, they're about the same. With respect to soundness of money, they're ahead. And with respect to openness to trade, they're also ahead. So with respect to the really important aspects of entrepreneurial capitalism, these countries are more capitalist than the U.S., not less capitalist. And so that's, I think, again, stares you in the face.
I want to talk about your trip. We only had a brief moment to talk about it before.
Yeah.
You went to Romania and you actually gave a presentation on this very topic.
That's right, yes. Well, and they sent me two. And it's interesting what happens. There's something called the Murray Rothbard Institute, which certainly, the moment I heard about it, of course, it warmed my heart. I got to go there. And and the Murray Rothbard Institute actually consists of basically a couple of free market Austrian professors at the Romanian American University that was started 25 years ago. And but they call themselves, that's a great name, and that's where I want to be. So, but they then advertise, hey, we've got this free market guy who would like to deliver a few lectures. And so they arranged to have me present the Economic Freedom Index and the story for the U.S. and for Romania to a group of economists who work for the government. And they forewarned me that these people are very Keynesian and not at all too keen on something like the Economic Freedom Index. But I got a very polite hearing, and then this is the interesting thing about Romania, because I wanted, of course, to report on the Economic Freedom Index there. In Romania, 4 out of 5 components have been rising, but one component, that's what I mentioned before, legal system and property rights, has been falling at the same time. And the findings of the scholarship show, as indeed the report states, if you do badly on legal system and property rights, it also almost doesn't matter how well you do with the others. As I mentioned, Scandinavia does very well in that regard, and Romania not only does poorly, but has been declining. And that's the news I brought them. I said, my God, here I am, an outsider. I don't know a whole lot about your economy, but I can report that something's going on with respect to legal system and property rights. That's bad news for the Romanian economy. And there I struck a responsive chord. A number of people raised their hands and talked about the difficulties of having title to property in Romania. And part of it actually is a throwback to the ousting of the communist dictator Ceausescu, which happened in 1989. There still is to this day petitions with respect to property by people who claim that they've been dispossessed, and the whole thing has gotten out of hand. Almost nobody can sort of reliably own property because you don't know if you're going to be challenged by somebody who claimed his ancestor owned that property once before. They should be able to deal with that. They maybe have a briefer window of opportunity. Say, if you want to claim property, then we give you a 24-month window. Please come forward. But this has gone on and on. The court system seemed to be rigged. I quoted them. I said, look, they're interviewing the Romanian executives, and the Romanian executives are saying that the court system is unfair, it's not reliable, something's going on that you should attend to. I think that as I mentioned, because of the comments I got from the audience about this, I think that in that regard, at least, I struck a responsive chord. So that was at least, an experience, and an experience worth having. I wasn't just talking to a receptive audience about the Economic Freedom Index. I heard something else, Tom, which I emailed you, which amused me. On a slightly different topic involving Paul Krugman, the economist at the Rothbard Institute who was sponsoring me told me that he had raised the point about Bob Murphy wanting to debate Krugman, and he was told by 2 different free market economists whom I won't name because I only got the story secondhand, that they cautioned anybody from debating Krugman, that Krugman was some kind of a smart guy and that Bob Murphy is foolish to want to debate him. And I just had a big laugh from this. I said, it's hard for me to imagine how those guys could talk that way. They're American economists with some free market credentials. They're not Austrians. But I believe that it's just what explained the crazy story. And I said, look, you probably listened to Contra Krugman, and I've written about Krugman, and I thought he's an easy mark. It almost is too easy to do Contra Krugman, and these guys are saying that Krugman can't be contradicted. He's too smart for anybody to want to debate with him. And I believe it's what must be the reason for these silly statements is this perverse sort of defense of your fellow academician. I mean, let's say that's my wild guess, because it's hard for me to imagine how anybody who reads Krugman, as I have, ever since he started his column in the New York Times in 1999, can possibly believe that the guy can't be debated. It's almost like something you do with your left hand half the time, which seems to happen with you and Bob, not infrequently, and in the show that I listen to every week, Contra Krugman, because it does save me the trouble of actually having to read Krugman. But also, of course, I love most of what you guys do with Krugman and how you basically try to point out that he's off on cloud nine. But amazingly, I told my colleague at Romanian American University that the next guy you should invite is Bob Murphy to maybe to lecture on such matters involving Krugman, so that nobody's persuaded that Krugman is beyond reproach.
Yeah, exactly. And Bob just knows Krugman inside and out. Yeah. Well, in terms of Krugman and debates, I'd actually like to see a debate between Krugman and an actual Austrian.
Yes.
Not a Krugman and a 70% free market guy, or a Krugman and a supply sider, or a neoclassical. I want Krugman against a real live Austrian, because I think that would be interesting. And I frankly think, in terms of his debating ability, I think he is way overrated. I think he builds up a lot of hype about himself, but I think he would be very uncomfortable in a debate with a really solid Austrian.
No, absolutely. All you have to do, I mean, the most you did have, in my recommendation, Jeremy Hammond, who had been steeped, in reading the Austrians, actually based on your reading list, and did this amusing 100-page treatment comparing Paul Krugman's wild statements for years before the Great Recession with Ron Paul's much more prescient statements, and that really comes closest to being sort of a quasi-Austrian evisceration of Krugman.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Ron Paul. Yeah.
Well, I just want to make sure people know. Now that you mentioned that, I'll link to that old episode. This episode will be at tomwoods.com/634, and on that page, I'll link to that previous episode with Hammond, because it's an oldie but goodie. If you didn't get to hear it, you should listen to it.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, Jeremy, I think in the interview was even a little bit too modest. You really, listeners are really cheating themselves if they don't read that book, because it really is funny the way, I mean, Krugman's calling for a housing bubble and then denying he ever did. I mean, really just bobbing and weaving. He truly eviscerates him. But indeed, look, the way to approach Krugman is simply to quote him against himself, simply to put his statements side by side. He lives each day as though it were his first. Half the time he doesn't know what he said 3 months ago, and so just lay side by side his statements over months or years, and then ask him if he can possibly defend these remarks he keeps making, which contradict each other as indeed inevitably a Keynesian has to contradict himself, because it's impossible to sustain a Keynesian approach consistently, I guess, is the basic problem. So you just hoist him on his own petard. That's the way to approach it.
When you were in Romania and you met these, or you had in the audience these economists who worked for the Romanian government, were they basically like Keynesians?
Yes, absolutely. I was even a bit regretful that I didn't get a chance to just lecture on Krugman, because a lot of them liked Krugman. But certainly lecturing on the Economic Freedom Index was a good idea. Another guy in the department who came to two of my lectures, I delivered three. One of them was about inequality and Piketty, and the final one was a much more expansive version of another interview I did with you, which is I called it "Mommy Was a Commie." How I how I went from a red diaper baby to an Austrian. And there, I knew this Marxist economist who was at the Romanian American University came to that lecture as well. And I especially went after Marxian economics because there was a stage at which, in my intellectual development, that I was wrestling with it. And so I kept hammering at the ludicrous formulations of Marxist economics. And there, too, I seemed to have scored some points because he was giving ground, asking some questions and giving ground on this point and on various points I was making. And my colleague who sponsored me at Romanian thought it was a good hit, that it was a good evening. So there, too, as I mentioned, it was clearly a pretty stimulating time. But with respect to the Keynesians, they were sort of like too intimidated by half. When I spoke at the government supported group, the head of it met with me later and kept soft-sourcing me, kept telling me how important it is for me to be emphasizing economic freedom. But every time I asked him a question, he was equivocating. So we were too polite by half. He was too polite with me by half because he basically, in the back of his, when, for example, I asked him about openness to trade, he played the usual card, and the first thing he said was, there's a lot of things that Romanians import that we can produce domestically if we only, that kind of card, which is you immediately realize where that's coming from. That he really doesn't want openness to trade. Basically, it's the old emphasis on the mercantilist emphasis. So there, I was in a bit of a thicket with being able to sort of join the issue with the Keynesians. But certainly, as I mentioned, I said, the Bob and Tom show would be a great show if they could possibly pay for your trip and Bob's. But certainly, Bob would be great appearing before these people, the Keynesians and others. In fact, I could coach him. I could tell him what to expect and what to anticipate, and ways to draw a little blood and a little pushback from these people. So that could be fun if Bob goes next time. They basically, of course, I get a steady paycheck. They didn't pay for my fees. They paid all my costs. They even paid for business class, plane flight because it's all the way to Romania. But otherwise, I earned nothing from the week, so it was they just picked up my costs.
Well, someday when I'm an empty nester and don't have 5 children in the house,
right.
then I can imagine I would take a bunch of those trips just because I'd say, hey, free trip to, especially the business class flight actually would probably make the difference for me.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's I'm a lot older than you, so that was a necessity. Being able to stretch out on the seat, anyway.
Yeah. Well, we are in a way taking Contra Krugman on the road in Seattle in May. The Mises Institute's having an event. We're going to record an episode live in front of an audience during that event, and then we've got a cruise coming up. We're going to record an episode while we're at sea, and then I haven't asked Lou Rockwell yet, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn. But this summer at the Mises University, I thought it might be fun to maybe do an episode of Contra Krugman where we've got the whole faculty sitting there with microphones and anybody can chime in at any point. And so we'll pick a really juicy Krugman column and just demolish it with a dozen faculty. It'd be like the episode, the mother of all episodes.
No, that would be great. I even believe, Tom, that you haven't hit the worst. I'd have to think that if I were asked to put down Krugman's top hits, is the top 10 Krugmanisms that are the most ridiculous. Maybe you've had one or two. I'd have to think. But I mean, over the years, he's really just topped himself. As good as your show is, you really haven't even as yet hit some of the craziest stuff.
Actually, I am glad that you said that because basically we're kind of the way we've chosen to do the show. We're held hostage by whatever he chooses to discuss. But if there's a week, and he's had a lot of weeks where his 2 columns are both about the Republicans are stupid or health care. We've covered that a million times. Maybe one of these weeks, I'll run it by Bob. We will. I am sure the listeners would go for this. We would say instead this week on Contra Krugman, we're going to do the top 10 greatest Krugman hits.
Yes.
I bet you that would be our most listened to episode.
Yeah. That one you should call Krugmania, when he really went off even for him, went off the deep end completely. I will say that amazingly, the only the only thing where he was reasonably sound in the old days and was never bad was about free trade. But even there now, as you know, if you've been following him, he's beginning to sound nutty, even on the subject about which he was supposed to know something about free international trade. So he's beginning to show his lunacy, even in that regard. But certainly, I believe that maybe every calendar quarter you should have a lull for one of Krugman's greatest hits. Because I don't know if you can cover 10 in one session. Maybe you can, perhaps. Anyway.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we could. I mean, yeah, obviously you could do an episode on each one, but it might also be fun just to do a lightning round type of. But anyway, I'm here. I am just thinking out loud about the show.
Those are all good plans, Tom, which I've inspired you to do. And,
you have. This is a brilliant idea. Absolutely great. And it's funny that lately on the show, I've been giving other people ideas. People will come on and I'll say, "Here's a good book for you to go write." They've got these homework assignments, but now I've got a pretty good assignment.
Yes.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate this, Gene. I'm glad you had a good, safe, and rewarding trip to Romania, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Sure. Talk to you soon, Tom. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. I got a freebie for you before I let you go. Tomorrow on the show, if all goes well, we're going to have T. Harv Eker, who I'm sure many of you have already heard of. He is a smash best-selling author, huge, millions of copies hit he had with his book Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. It was a #1 New York Times bestseller, just smashed the sales charts, just went crazy. He's also a multi-millionaire entrepreneur in his own right. We'll have a lot to talk about with him. If you're on my email list, which I hope you are, you can hop on it at tomwoods.com. Just click the little notify me button at the top. And in my email the other day, I was summarizing some of his views about wealth and rich and poor. And he is of the belief that one of the reasons, or a key factor in accounting for why some people are rich and some people are not rich, has to do with mentality, has to do with the beliefs you hold about wealth and about rich people and so on. And frankly, what he's saying, without putting it quite this way, is that leftist views about wealth are going to hold you back. So I sent out a very controversial email summarizing his views, and of course my list loved it, so I didn't get that much pushback. A little bit on Facebook, that people were outraged that he would say these things about poor people, but I'm just sick and tired of tiptoeing around things and treating everybody like delicate flowers. Sometimes you got to have some tough love and talk about things that everybody who isn't, living with his eyes closed already knows. Well, anyway, so we're going to talk to T. Harv Eker tomorrow. I managed to snag him for the show, but in advance of the show, he's asked me to mention that he has a free ebook that he's giving away, and it's called Speed Wealth, as all one word. How to Stop Earning a Living and Start Creating Wealth. Harv has been an extremely successful career and wealth coach. So he's got this free ebook, and so if you'd like to look at it to get a sense of where he's coming from before the episode, or of course, you can read it whenever you want, but I've got it at a shortcut at tomwoods.com/speedwealth, all one word, tomwoods.com/speedwealth. I love this guy. Ever since I started reading his other book, I love this guy. So I'm really glad he agreed to be on the show. It was actually a vetting process I had to go through to get him on the show. So I consider this a tremendous victory for me and for the listeners. So I hope you'll tune in tomorrow. Check out tomwoods.com/speedwealth, and we'll see you then.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.